All right, what's up? Says, I sometimes like to do reviews, and I haven't done one in a while, but I just finished reading a manga, Holyland, by the author Koji Mori. Or if you want to say Mori Koji, I don't know. Just they flip the names around in Japanese, so it always confuses me. But I finished, this was a 182 chapter manga, I believe 18 volumes, and I finished it in 2 days. That tells you that I was real invested in it. Like I just almost finished it in one night, and I think this manga is fucking pretty good. Now this manga is actually finished. It's a completed work, and it was I believe serialized from 2000 to 2008 for 8 years, if I'm correct. So it's a relatively older series, I would say. I mean, it's 12 years old, and if and depending on where you look at it, it's even older than that if you think about when it began in 2000, so 20 years now. And I think this is something, I think it's underrated. I don't know too much about the early 2000 scenes in terms of manga and anime and stuff like that. But what I can say now is the 2020, no one talks about this. No, I don't think I've ever heard of anyone ever talk about this. I literally just stumbled upon this manga by just searching up different mangas and just looking through like the different sites I used to find certain types of manga, and I was craving, you know, I don't know. I was just looking through, and I this kind of stood out to me, Holy Land, and I was like, you know what? I'll read it, and it was a fucking ride. So let me tell you what this story is about. This story follows our young male protagonist, as he basically goes into like the street underworld, right? The street underworld, where he is basically wants to fight people. So he just it's like basically kind of like Fight Club, but not really because he's just kind of wants to be a part of like this nightlife, street life in Japan, and he's just fighting his way through it. And he's like this weak ass motherfucker, and then he becomes pretty powerful towards that because he's trains and stuff. But um, but what's so interesting about this is that I think this manga is extremely realistic when it comes to fighting techniques in martial arts. Right? You have all these other manga like with that says martial arts, and they're just like fucking flying all over the place, fucking fighting. You got like DBZ. I mean, how fucking realistic is that shit? They're fucking flying around, teleporting, right? So that doesn't seem to me to suggest realism. I'm sorry to say this, but but it's still a very fun show or anime if you sorry manga and anime if you are interested in that type of stuff, but this is much more realistic. And what's so interesting about why Holy Land is so realistic is I believe this author, uh uh Mori Koji, Jesus, gotta remember his name. He actually, I believe, was a street fighter, if I'm correct, just based on what I've searched up, what I've researched. I think it's implied, and even throughout the manga, it's implied that he was an actual street fighter throughout his years, and so this brings this sense of more realism to the fights, as well as what could happen on the streets, because it's gritty and realistic. And I know it has some tropes and stuff, and all sorts of that is still there in this manga, but I think it's just very interesting that he brings that flair to it, that realism of the fights especially. And what's so interesting about this manga is that what you're following is this I can't even describe it. I it's this Let me give you a little synopsis of the little shonen protagonist here. Our little shonen protagonist. We're not gonna I mean our seinen protagonist, I'm not even gonna say his name. You don't need to know names. I'll just call him that. That's all you need to know. He he basically, and this is gonna be it's not. I'm not gonna try to spoil. I want to see how I want to word this. He basically is trying to find a place where he can belong, right? And that's kind of why he starts going into this nightlife, street life, where he's kind of the scrawny kid. He's getting his ass beat and all of that stuff, but he still wants to be a part of it. And throughout the series, there's like some real deep messages, I think, and deep themes talking about losing oneself in your identity, finding a place to belong with. It even deals with I'm sorry to say this, certainly heavy themes about suicide and drug use, per se. Let's just say, and I think it's and I think it's a very I think it's a very dark, deep, and I think it's a very mature show, and I think people should know that. I'm sorry, not show, manga, mature manga. It's a seinen, and I think people should understand that. But let me tell you, the fight scenes are pretty good. I think they're really nicely drawn. It shows a level of realism that I think is lost in most martial arts manga, right? So let me show you just a couple pictures. Like for example, this. Right, this is like a straight. See, even I learned some of this, some of these terms. I believe this is a straight, if I'm correct, a straight right. It's a straight right? Because that's what our main seinen protagonist does. And then this is, I believe, crap. I believe it's a back kick, if I'm correct. And the big thing here is that there's been a lot of research that I think this author does into looking at all these different fighting styles and explaining why you use each of these different techniques and how you would use them. For example, the protagonist uses this kick against this person because this person has basically a kendo sword, right? And he uses a kendo sword and he has a weapon. So basically, you use this back kick because it's extremely good against users who use weapons because you can basically duck your head beneath this kendo sword so you don't get hit, as well as pushing them back because it's very hard for someone to get their fists in, right? And so he uses that as a technique, and it's explained in great detail as why he uses that technique. And I think what's very interesting about this author is, and I don't know how truthful it is, let's just say, I didn't, it's not the most legal way of how I per se maybe read the manga because it's just impossible. It's impossible to find. Um, but throughout the manga, the author seems to insert himself and talks about his experiences in comparison to the experiences of the different characters within this manga. Right, and it's implied. This is where I'm coming in. It's implied, and I'm pretty sure this author was a street fighter. And I'll say it again. He was a real street fighter, and he was fighting. He was doing exactly the same things. Now, now, just to understand how crazy this guy was. All right, if I'm gonna, okay, I don't know how realistic. I've heard some rumors, and I couldn't find the source for it. But supposedly, if people here know, they're the author of Berserk, right? Kentaro Mira, or Mira Kentaro, depends how you want to say it. In Japanese, they kind of switch it. It confuses me sometimes. But Kentaro Mira, he's the author of Berserk, and I think he's actual friends with this author, Mori Koji. They went to the same high school, and they were actually both manga artists liking to do manga. And I think Kentaro and they both became successful, of course. But Kentaro Miura says that his characters Guts and Griffith are based off a friend he had that was like a fighter, like a street fighter who went out and was super ruthless and just beat on people and beat the hell out of them. Who then after fighting these people, beating the hell out of them, he then comes back, draws manga with him, and then goes to his part time job afterwards, right? And then this same person also, stopped drawing manga for 7 years and then started drawing manga again, right? And so why I'm thinking this is probably uh, Mori Koji is because the how he described it is like he only really has one friend, which is this man here who's been his friend since um, high school, and he also draws manga, and he's a street fighter. And on top of that, Koji Mori even said that he couldn't draw manga for 7 years. So I think that seems to kind of push it together, but this is an unconfirmed source. I'm just saying this man is the fucking basis for both part of Griffith and Guts' character in terms of the fucking bloodshed, the fucking like like I guess the bloodshed and the brutality, I guess, of Guts, and then like the regality of kind of Griffith's character to a certain degree. And so it's very interesting, and I would highly suggest it. Um, for me, I'm gonna give a score. I give a score of probably 8 or 9 out of 10. I'll go with 8 out of 10. I think there was certainly tropes that I think I didn't really need, but of course, sometimes that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I think he did it somewhat well. Sometimes the story became a little one dimensional, in terms of the characters. And then I was personally, and this is more of a personal thing, I understand that I think that the end made sense, but I also didn't think it made sense at the same time. I know that sounds weird. I don't want to ruin it, but personally, the ending was not to my taste, but I think it makes sense in terms of what the author is going for. But I also think he should have done it differently, personally, because I was pretty invested into the main protagonist. Don't need to even say his name; you'll figure it out when you read the manga yourself, right? He's known as God. The main protagonist is known as the Thug Hunter. That's what I remember him as, right? The Thug Hunter. So that tells you kind of where our main protagonist becomes. All right, our main seinen protagonist. And so yeah, I think this is a great manga if you're into martial arts and you're into that type of stuff, similar, and you want some more realism. I think this is a great manga to start. I think it's a great manga to read. And I was very much invested and just excited throughout the whole time I was reading it. Just a little disappointed with the end, but that's besides the point. Thank you again for listening into this video by G.